Hey everyone, thanks for joining a talk. We're here to talk about what does it mean to build a proactive security culture in an organization. So who the hell are we? Um, well, my name is Mukund. I run product security at Chime. Prior to Chime, I was at Karma, and even prior to that, I was at Synopsys. Arkadiy?
Hi, everyone. My name is Arkadiy. I'm a security architect at Chime, and previously I was at Twitter and Airbnb.
Cool.
So what are we planning on covering today? Very briefly, we're going to talk about what do we mean by security culture and why invest in it at all? Why is it important? Then we're going to talk about what has and hasn't worked for our organization and our past organizations. Then a little bit on how you can measure security culture, and then our concluding thoughts and questions from you all.
All right. So, what do we even mean by security culture? So, I think at its core, the culture that you have determines how work gets done in your organization. So, this is very much rooted in one's behavior. So, things like how people work, how do people communicate, what behaviors are incentivized. All of these are some of these are factors that contribute to what kind of security culture one could have in an organization. And we think all of these are factors that one could consciously choose to invest in. We'll talk more about that in a
So why should you invest in culture? Why is it important? Well, almost all security work at organizations happens outside of the security team. It's going to be done by product engineering, data, marketing, analytics, et cetera. All of these other teams, they're the ones who are really in the day-to-day and implementing all this work. And you're not in their reporting chains. You can't order them to do things. You can't tell them you must do this thing. So it's really important that you lead in your organization through soft power and through influence. And you do that by having a security culture. That's one of the most scalable ways to enact security changes in your organization. And the business needs to find value in your services. So you should make a conscious effort to build social capital with people, and you can use that as currency to get your changes accomplished. And it's not always about getting things done. You just need to be reasonable sometimes. This was a tweet that really resonated with us. Hey, if you work for a security organization in a company and your users see you as the enemy, maybe you should rethink what you're doing. You know, if people don't like you, then you're going to have a very hard time accomplishing your goals.
Cool. So, other reasons why you would be investing in your security culture, I think you need your organization's help to get done through your regular day-to-day security work. Most of the time, security teams are tiny compared to the size of engineering or the rest of the company. So, if you look at engineering, it's close to like 1:150. The ratio that is like for every 150 engineers, you have maybe one security engineer. So there's absolutely no way you're going to know what all of these 150 engineers are doing. You got to build a culture where they trust you enough so that they can come to you and tell you when, for example, they're going and writing a whole new third-party integration, or if they actually accidentally clicked on something, or they downloaded something that they don't actually know if it is safe, and they should trust you to come and tell you that, hey, I did this accidentally. Similarly, like having a collaborative culture here makes it very easy and not an upward battle for every single thing. You don't have to justify yourself just because you're going and asking an engineer, hey, why are you doing this? If you are caught up in that world, then you are never going to be successful growing that security program. Cool. So what works? Building relationships, and both top down and bottom up. I think both of them are equally important. I'll go over top down. So if you have been at situations where you've had a hard time getting the rest of the company being accountable for security, that means something is wrong. So I think start with the leaders, talk to your VPs, talk to your senior directors, talk to your directors, ask them what is it that they are worried about security. Like, you got to make sure that the question is turned towards themselves and ask them like, hey, reflect on what is it that you're building and what is it that could go wrong from a security perspective. We are here to help you, but we need you to tell us what is it that you're worried about. Similarly, ask them what are the top goals. Try and convince them like, how are you there to help them satisfy those. Also understand how are they incentivized by. If supporting security or getting security stuff done is not part of their incentives, then you're never going to be successful. This is for more advanced companies teams. If you can go do security roadshows, so I found this really helpful. At the minimum, you'll figure out who the most toxic leaders are in the rest of the organization. Why is that important? Because you'll know where you're going to get most of the resistance from.
Cool. So that was building relationships top down. I also find building relationships bottom up very effective. Meet engineers where they are. So be very active on code reviews, on design reviews, in Jira, on Slack, in your security ask channel, everywhere else. I find it really effective to be very vocal, very active. And if people can see that you're putting in all this work and being very responsive and watching things very closely, they'll understand that it's important. They'll be more likely to work with you. They'll be more likely to listen to you if you approach them with some sort of change or ask request or something like that. Sometimes certain teams, you might have a pretty good relationship with the leader of the team and you can go to them directly, but other times you might have a poor relationship with the manager, but you might have an excellent relationship with an engineer on the team taking that bottom-up approach, and you can just go to them directly and say, hey, can you patch this thing really quick and skip all the rigmarole of like a sprint planning or something like that? So it's really nice to have that kind of optionality. And also for more advanced teams, if your company reaches a certain size, having an embedded security program where you're actually going to take a security engineer and put them within some other team also can be very effective. Again, requires a certain level of maturity to get to that point.
Cool. What else works? So having a challenge network definitely helps. So this is a group of people that you trust that can give you good, candid, direct feedback. Realize that they are going to be your biggest critics, but it's fine. Like have them in whenever you're building a new security product or a security feature or process, and ask them for feedback. Like tell them, hey, how does this look for you? Like, does this make sense? I think they are people that you can rely on, and I think having that challenge network in every company of where I've been in has really helped me growing that security culture. Similarly, I think one other thing that a lot of teams get on into the world is trying to make everyone happy. Just realize that's never going to happen, and actually it kind of degrades your security culture if you get to that level. So it's perfectly fine to make sure that to realize that not everyone is going to be happy with what you do.
Another tool that has worked very effectively for us is just being completely transparent with engineering, with the rest of the company. Share metrics, share bug bounty reports, share pen test reports. Is it not audible? Okay, I'm just going to use this for now. Yeah, share metrics, share bug bounty reports, share pen test reports. I've actually worked in security teams before where maybe they're worried about like having their vulnerabilities be open in Jira. Maybe somebody sees the vulnerability and then they exploit it somehow. I'm not saying that's not an impossible risk, but I think that the benefits of sharing and being open with your program far outweigh any sort of risk from someone like exploiting an issue that they find in Jira. So leave all your Jira issues open, run blameless retros, admit when you're wrong, show vulnerability, not just the security kind. Sometimes you misjudge the impact of vulnerability. If that happens, just say to the team, my bad. Don't try and force the issue. And then later, if you're approaching them about something else, they'll know you're coming from a place of good faith. Share updates and be visible. So that means presenting at company all hands and giving talks, sending out a newsletter, sending out presentations, doing engineering brown bags, very common at companies. One thing that I find really effective is bug bounty walkthroughs. I think a lot of engineers actually really are very curious about security. How does it work? How do I get into it? But they don't know, or they don't have the resources available to them. So if you just send out a blurb, here's a vulnerability that we had, here's what the impact was, here's how you exploit it, here's like a curl command that you can run. Engineers will really enjoy that kind of content, and then they'll be much more willing to work with you. And again, more of an advanced item, but if your company reaches a level where you can run security awareness events, that's also very effective. That requires a lot of work.
Cool. I think making it easy to do the right thing is also really, really effective. A lot of companies are using the Netflix paid path approach. I think it's proven to be effective. Make sure that security controls are baked into the frameworks or libraries that your rest of the engineering is using. And when that's not possible, make it easy for people to be notified that, hey, something is going wrong. Like, here's how you fix it simply. Similarly, I think documentation and education that do not suck or is directly to the point is really, really effective. And I think instead of trying to teach them the entire history of a vulnerability and everything, just get to the point and make it very effective, and that really works. And gamification is also huge at Chime, where we are. If you've missed the previous talk on Monocle. It's basically a tool that we've built inside that basically gamifies security for the rest of services that are, or rest of the teams that are building services. So we have, say, hundreds of services. We want all these services to do X, Y, and Z. Instead of going and reaching out to all of these services to say, hey, go do X, Y, Z, we gamify it by giving them a security score. And that's been really effective. The other thing that has really worked for us is meeting developers where they are. Like, if you onboard a dozen vendors or you are integrating with a dozen tools, you can't expect your developers to go log into all of those tools and look at all the findings. Like, simplify it for them, meet them where they are. Use Jira if that's what the developers are using. Use GitHub Advanced Security Dashboard if that's what people are doing. Like, make it available to them where they are instead of expecting them to log into all your security tools. Similarly, I think how many of you here have a policy that says you shall or you must rotate your secrets every 90 days? Right? Quite a few of you have that. How many of you make it easy for developers to do that? Like, how many of them self-service tools that they can go do it themselves? Right. So almost no one. So I think that's kind of the point I'm trying to make, is like, make it easy for developers to do the right thing, and they will more likely go and do that right thing.
Another way that we find it effective to build security culture within an organization: be pragmatic. Don't practice security absolutism. Be realistic about risk. You're never going to solve all risk. There's always going to be some residual risk remaining. Don't let perfect be the enemy of good. You know, you can resolve some risks really, really effectively. Don't practice security absolutism. Don't be a security Nazi. If somebody comes to you and asks you a question, maybe even if the answer is no, like, sometimes you have to say no, but don't be mean about it. Be empathetic, try and understand their needs and help them accomplish their goals. Have a security engineering onboarding or just regular security onboarding for your whole company that doesn't suck and be relevant. So, you know, I've seen security presentations in the past, and I'll touch on this in some later slides, but they'll say things like, don't click on suspicious links, which is like, I've been doing this for a while. I don't know what a suspicious link is. Don't connect to untrusted networks. Like, I don't think that's really relevant anymore. Don't practice like performative exercises, right? Make it relevant for people, show people some real world impacts, show people some real world, like, how are companies getting hacked? And then you know, people will listen to you. They'll be more likely to take your advice or work with you. And this is just a funny comic that I enjoyed from Poorly Drawn Lines. You have to choose your battles. I choose all of them. Like, be like the rat, don't be like the raven.
Cool. Also, yeah, you rely more and more on your other engineering or other domains of your company to do the work. Like, give them credit, give them kudos, give them shout outs, send them cupcakes. It's perfectly fine. People love cupcakes. I'll take more if you have some. But I think in general, I think people tend to really focus more on like telling their team like, hey, you're doing a good job for going and doing all these things. I think it's also important to tell your vendors or your other supporting functions in the company that, hey, when they're actually doing things, like, tell them thank you. Also realize that not everyone is incentivized the same way. So see what it is that the team really values. Like, someone might just value more bonus, or someone might just be happy with the cupcake. It doesn't matter. Like, just find out what they are and reach out to them with those. Similarly, I think it's also okay to ask for help. A lot of security teams get into this world of, oh, I'm the engineer, I need to go solve all the problems. Like, no, I don't think you know the domain as well as your domain teams do. So reach out to them, tell them what the problem you're trying to solve for. Ask them how is it that they can help you solving that particular problem, and it actually works wonderful.
Cool. So that was some things that have worked well for us. Now we're going to go over some things that have worked not well, that have made security culture worse in our organizations. So to start things off, I'm just going to give you a second to read this tweet that I enjoyed. I think it's a really funny tweet, but the reason that I included it is because I, again, have seen this in so many organizations where people don't trust their own employees. They don't trust engineers. They keep everything very close to the chest. And, you know, you can imagine if you go to some engineer and say, hey, I need you to do this thing. It's really important. I need you to drop everything and do it right now. I'm not going to tell you why I'm asking you to do it. Like, that's never going to land well. But I've seen people do that. It's nuts. So it's kind of just the opposite of the transparency slide. You really, really, really want to be overly transparent with your team.
Hard deadlines and ultimatums don't work. Don't try this. There's always going to be scenarios where your policy doesn't work or your policy is not applicable. So try and reason with the engineering team or whichever domain team you're working with. For more often than not, we have seen that people will try and help you do the right thing. It's just that if someone is going out of the way to not do something, it's because whatever you're asking them to do is not applicable for their domain. So yeah.
Another thing that doesn't work too well is being disconnected from reality or losing credibility with engineering. So examples of that, if you're going to run some sort of off-the-shelf scanner and just like open up hundreds of Jira tickets against the team and ask them to validate the findings, that's going to be really hard, right? A lot of those are probably going to be false positives or unreachable code or low severity, or maybe it's a real valid issue and there's no patch available and the team just can't do anything about it. So put in that work up front to validate the findings, bring them the relevant things that they need to actually action, and don't give them a lot of like busy work that they don't want to do. And don't be removed from like how engineering writes and deploys code. You know, don't just like throw things over the fence and say like, hey, we need this thing done, go do this thing, without understanding the complexity or the size of the ask that you're giving them. That's not going to be very effective. Oh, and here's another tweet that we enjoyed. So this is Dino, head of security at Cash App. You know, if engineering doesn't like working with you, you aren't going to have a secure environment no matter what else you do. I think that's very true.
Cool. Security teams that are disengaged from the rest of the process in the same line, I think if folks are interested in doing the right thing and they reach out to you and be like, hey, I'm going to do this third-party integration, or I'm going to have this whole new data source exported, how do I do it right? And you're not engaged and you're not telling them what is it, how do they do it right, and just being disengaged never works. So I think the quality of your security program or how well you do from a security perspective is directly related to how engaged you are with the rest of the program.
This is another thing that really is a pet peeve of mine, giving useless advice. So I mentioned some of these already. Don't click suspicious links. What's a suspicious link? I have no idea. Don't connect to untrusted networks. I think this is really outdated advice. Everything runs over TLS now. It's just not a real issue. This FBI Denver tweet, I think, went viral in the security company community. A few weeks ago, they posted this tweet saying, like, watch out for juice jacking attacks in airports, which is not a thing that anyone needs to worry about. I don't know why they decided to tweet about this, but then they got a lot of flack for it. So give people like actionable, relevant advice that, you know, is up to date. That's not this like outdated, like performative, like check the box kind of control. Don't give generic advice. You should be specific and actionable. An example of this, I've seen examples in the past where someone, you know, you give someone some advice like, oh, you're accepting file uploads, like scan that for malware. And then that's it. That's the like one bullet point of feedback, scan items for malware. And it's like, how is the team supposed to do that? Are they going to use a vendor? Are they going to onboard a whole vendor to do this thing? Are they going to deploy some off-the-shelf solution? Like, how do they actually do that? Like you give people advice that they can actually follow.
Cool. Now that we've spoken about what security culture is, what works and what doesn't work, there are some things that we use to measure security culture. It's just like any other vulnerability that you have, and you measure the age of it. You can also measure security culture. Some things that work for us. It doesn't have to be too fancy. It could be just things that you have in your spreadsheet. But I start off with, who do I meet with? How many engineering teams are there in my organization? Do I meet with all of them? How are they doing from a security perspective? If I do meet with them or don't meet with them, are they remediating more issues just because I meet with them? Are they involving security in more of their initiatives if we meet with them? Things like Monocle really helps us because, again, we are trying to track their score based on the gamification over here to see how does a team perform over time. Like, are they improving in their security posture or decreasing? Things like how quickly do teams adopt to security controls or frameworks that we have been introducing. Again, what's the correlation directly with, like, do you have a relationship with that team or not? Or are they looking at their Monocle scores or like their security scores or anything in that sense? What's their interaction with security? I think one thing we have seen over time is teams have started including security as a bullet point in their sprint planning, which shows that we are doing some things right. So they go look at, hey, let's go check out Monocle and see, okay, how do we have any action items for this sprint and things in that sense.
Cool. So that's pretty much the slides that we had. Just very briefly in conclusion, you should definitely invest in security culture. It pays dividends. It's going to be the way that you scale your security program and make changes, especially across a larger organization. The larger that your organization is, the harder it is to change culture. So start early, and that'll really pay off. And there's no silver bullet. You're going to have to, try out whatever works and doesn't work in your organization.
Cool. We're hiring for a data security expert. So if it's something that you're interested in, you're ready to come help us secure all our data pipelines and everything in the world of data, to reach out to us. We will open it up for questions. Yes.
So when I look at Netflix, right, it's a super large organization with a lot of security practitioners in that organization. So my question comes down to, from a top-down approach, uh, what advice can you give on that? Do you feel like the CEO itself is somebody who has to be fully invested in cybersecurity, and does he help that top-down approach? And then two, how did Netflix get to where they are? Because they seem to be the outlier in cybersecurity within the tech world.
Yeah.
Do you want to repeat the question?
Oh, sure. Given that Netflix culture is different from many others, and I think if I'm paraphrasing the question correctly, it's to say that how does it work for organizations that don't really have a top-down culture?
Is this?
And what mechanisms can a company with that culture do? I think it's more prevalent for companies where there is a kind of a top-down approach instead of. I think for Netflix, you might not run into that accountability problem that often. One thing I've really realized that for situations where the company thinks, okay, just because we've hired a security team, it's their responsibility to go fix all the issues. That's where more of the top-down culture really is more applicable or effective, is that you get them to be more accountable, to say that we're just here to help your function deliver things more securely, less about we are going to be responsible for securing all of your product. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but do you guys upward voices to the executive teams, let's say even from your CISO? Do you feel like your CISO
Yes.
is having the correct conversations with the CEOs to help enforce that?
All right, I'll repeat the question. The question is, how is our CISO reporting back to the CEO, or is there even that connection? Yes, there is. There is a way of reporting risks back all the way back to the leadership and also the board, just like most of the companies, I imagine. And yes, our CISO, like, we report back to all the different domain VPs, but also we also report back to the CTO and the CEO if needed, depending on what the level of the risk is. Like, is a risk that someone is not patching or fixing or implementing going to open up a risk that's going to affect the entire company, or what's the likelihood and impact of it? Depending on that, we report.
If I could just add some concrete examples. So we have an audit committee to the board that our CISO presents at quarterly. We have a monthly engineering review where we're presenting metrics, and that's being seen by leaders. We have our boss, the CISO, he's managing upwards. That's his job, to try and like present those findings and make sure that the peers and like leadership are seeing the things that we think are scary and making sure that those are being actioned on. Are there any other examples? There we go.
We also have like a monthly engineering review that's more for engineering, but all the engineering VPs, directors, all of them get a sense of that. But that's more on the engineering side. Yeah. Sorry, David. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so you mentioned earlier about like making sure you're not making like garbage, like low set of findings in teams. Like, I can see how that could work for vulnerabilities you're finding or a dashboard is finding. But anyway, how would you do that for dependency vulnerabilities? You know, there may be 1,000 in one project, and you're constantly getting flooded with this alert. Like, how do you do that scalably?
So the question was, how do you scale dependency vulnerability management when there's maybe thousands of low severity findings, and how do we make sure that we're not spamming teams? So we keep plugging David's talk from earlier today. He wrote a tool called Monocle, and it's ingesting all of our GitHub data and presenting a dashboard to developers. Every repo gets a letter grade for how secure it is. Like, you have an A+ score for security, or you have an F score for security. There's like a badge that they put on their README. So that'll ingest findings from GitHub, and we just kind of take GitHub's word for what the severity of the findings is. Like, they'll triage those, and they bought Dependabot and some other things to do that. So that's one way. We make sure that Dependabot auto merge PRs are enabled on all of our repos, and then it's like solved for developers. They don't even have to do anything. What are some other ways? A lot of times there's a very high profile, like, I don't know, like Log4j or something, for example, where like when one of those happens, then we're going to do a very high touch, like actually actively find stuff ourselves and reach out to teams to make sure it's all patched. But for the most part, we just try and make sure people are applying all of their updates in a reasonable amount of time. And I think that's our time, but we are going to be outside if anyone has more questions.